Dustin Runnels has been around the block a time or two and just about done it all in the wrestling business over the past 30-odd years. A second-generation star who is still going strong. This is despite some angles and some characters that would have no doubt finished off a lesser performer. A legendary Hall of Fame caliber competitor, Runnels is rightly recognized for his ability in the squared circle, but his lasting legacy will no doubt be the outlandish personae that he has adopted throughout the years. So, what were they? How did they come about? And how well did Dustin pull them off? Dustin Rhodes. Dustin Runnels is, of course, the son of the late great American Dream Dusty Rhodes. And so it was only natural that he would use the famous surname as part of his identity during his early years in the business. Debuting in 1988, Dustin was a white meat rookie babyface working in Florida and for World Championship Wrestling before moving to the Texas territories and doing some tours of Japan. It should be noted as well that while working in the Land of the Rising Sun back then, Dustin was also booked as Dusty Rhodes Jr. He didn't have much of a gimmick back then. He was just a trunks and boots wrestler learning his trade while trying to carry the weight of being Dusty's kid. After a couple of years paying dues and getting halfway decent, Dustin joined his dad in the WWF in 1990. Not that you'd know it or anything, because he pretty much exclusively worked house shows outside of a 10-minute challenge match against Ted DiBiase. The only real highlight of that first WWE run for Dustin was getting to team up with his dad against the $1 Million Man and Virgil in a losing effort at the 1991 Royal Rumble. They left immediately after, heading back down south for WCW. Wrestling there as The Natural, this is when Dustin really began to grow and develop as a performer, working nightly alongside some of the greats like Barry Windham, Ricky Steamboat, and Terry Funk. He still didn't have much of a gimmick per se, but he was one hell of a fiery babyface, honing that southern wrestling style to perfection and looking comfortable in whatever match or scenario he was placed in. Well, apart from uncensored 1995's King of the Road match, a mad concept that saw Rhodes fight Barry Blacktop Bully Darso on the back of an 18-wheeler truck. Not only did the match fall into the better in theory than execution category, even though I'm not sure it actually was better in theory, but anyway, both Rhodes and Bully were fired immediately after for violating WCW's no blading policy. Goldust. Dustin wouldn't hang around feeling sorry for himself for long, accepting a job with the WWF shortly after. He would not, however, be returning to the company as the same fresh-faced fan favorite of years earlier. He wasn't going to be the straight-laced, high-fiving natural from WCW either. No. Runnels would be returning to the WWF as a completely new creation called Goldust. Where in real life Dustin Runnels was a beer-drinking, tobacco-spitting, country music listening, good old boy from the Lone Star State, Goldust was a bodysuit-wearing, sexually ambiguous, Hollywood-obsessed, androgynous heel. It was an odd fit, to say the least, and Runnels himself had to look up what the hell androgynous even meant, but he committed himself to the role completely, and it was his own idea to paint his face. He found it tough playing a heel in the beginning, and the character took time to find its feet, but it eventually got over in a big way. The addition of Marlena, played by then-wife Terry Runnels, as his manager, and the employment of homoerotic overtones as a piece of psychological warfare added to the act, and Goldust became one of the most controversial and most talked about WWF superstars of the day. The bizarre one flipped from heel to babyface and back again over the years, feuding with just about everyone. He won the Intercontinental Championship, he won the Hardcore Championship, he won the Tag Team titles, and was involved in many memorable storylines and moments. Goldust was so deeply into playing the character back in his earlier days, he once tried to convince Vince McMahon to let him get breast implants in order to add another dimension to him, I guess? The chairman thankfully declined the offer. There have been many iterations and looks for Goldust over the years. One of those stands out above all others. The artist formerly known as Goldust. Right, so in the early 90s, music star Prince got into a spat with his record company and changed his name to a symbol, becoming known in print media as the artist formerly known as Prince. WWF, ever having their finger on the pulse of pop culture, decided to send that up somewhat about 4 years later when Goldust became the artist formerly known as Goldust. No, Dustin didn't grow 2 feet shorter and start wearing a lot of purple. No, the artist formerly known as Goldust was a man having an identity crisis in the wake of leaving Marlena, shacking up with Luna Vachon, and adopting an impressionist gimmick in response. Goldust had become a sympathetic babyface during his tawdry feud with Brian Pillman, but turned heel again after he demonstrated that he was game for just about anything. He began dressing up in a variety of costumes, mimicking his fellow wrestlers, as well as celebrities like Marilyn Manson, Chyna, Triple H, Dude Love, Sable, Vader, Dusty Rhodes, and, regrettably, Flash Funk all got lampooned during this period, and Goldust would come out every week in a different guise. It was quite the trip watching the bloke come out wearing stuff like nappies and ball gags every Monday night, but it's the Attitude Era. It was the style at the time. After a few months of that weirdness, he shed the Goldust persona altogether and began wrestling under his real name, losing the costumes and wearing normal attire while cutting some worked shoot promos against Vince McMahon and the risque WWE product of the day. At this time, he began a born-again Christian-type character, extolling the virtues of Jesus Christ and doing things like pointing to the heavens and praying before matches. This all led to a feud with Val Venus, and eventually the return of the Goldust character. It turned out the he that Dustin was referring to as returning soon wasn't the Messiah, but a very naughty boy in Goldust. Swerve, bro. Goldust hung around for another year or so, but he wasn't as much of a featured part of the show, and he eventually left for WCW. Wait, going to WCW in 1999? Oh, what could possibly go wrong? 7. Obviously, Runnels couldn't show up in WCW as Goldust, and the natural just wouldn't wash. So a new gimmick was created, not by anyone in WCW, but by Dustin and his dad instead. Like Goldust, it would prove shocking and controversial, but unlike Goldust, it would prove to have no staying power. The gimmick was 7, a sinister, white-faced, black-attired presence modeled after the strangers from the Ridley Scott film Dark City. The character's arrival was hyped up with weeks of vignettes that showed 7 lurking around outside a child's bedroom window, talking about things hiding in the poor kid's closet and under his bed while thunder cracked and lightning snapped in the background. Now, you can hardly blame Turner Broadcasting's Standards and Practices Department for thinking that this might give the impression that a child abductor was on his way to WCW. On the supposedly family-friendly show, this didn't measure up, so they put the kibosh on it, although Runnels believed at the time that incoming head writer Vince Russo was the cause of 7's demise. Turned out, nothing to do with Russo. 7 still made his arena debut via an elaborate entrance where he floated to the ring, but Dustin immediately dropped the act, cut a shoot promo denouncing the character as he had done to Goldust the year before. And this time, he didn't go as far as burning the costume on the entrance ramp, but he did revert back to his real name and, for the rest of his WCW tenure, worked as plain old Dustin Rhodes. From there, Runnels resurfaced in WWE as Goldust. He went to TNA and worked without a gimmick, came back to WWE as Goldust, and then went back to TNA once more for a reign of terror, the likes of which you've never seen before. A black reign of terror. Oh, buckle up. Black Reign. When Runnels returned to TNA in 2007, he did so as Dustin Rhodes, but gave an interview explaining that he had a split personality and wasn't going to hide it any longer. The personality, which had been tormenting him since he was a little un, was Black Reign. I think this whole discussion of Black Reign should be prefaced with the knowledge that Dustin Runnels was going through a very bad time personally at this point. He was battling substance abuse issues, very clearly physically in a bad way as well. Black Reign sort of, kind of resembled Goldust in that Runnels painted his face. He wore a full-length body covering. He had a wig on. It was altogether, though, much more sinister a creation. Black Reign carried a stick to the ring, which had a hand holding a knife attached attached to the end of it. And he also spoke and licked the face of his pet rat called Misty. Involved in some of the worst content TNA ever produced. And just consider that statement for a second. Black Reign was a lamentable disaster for the company and for Rhodes himself. In fact, these days, Dustin Rhodes will not even speak of Black Reign, as it harkens back to the lowest point in his life. In fact, if you were to even bring up Black Reign with Dustin Rhodes on Twitter, there's a strong chance you get blocked for it. So let's not dwell on it anymore. Let's talk about the good times instead, shall we? Dustin Rhodes. Again. Dustin was able to clean himself up and earn his job back with WWE, working there as Goldust in various capacities off and on for the next decade until he asked for his release in order to join his brother Cody in All Elite Wrestling. There, he has wrestled once more as Dustin Rhodes and is an established and respected veteran. His match with Cody on pay-per-view is a classic that will stand the test of time, a marquee match for AEW, and a true comeback story for Dustin Rhodes. Dustin Runnels hasn't had too many gimmicks, as you have heard, but the ones he has had sure do stick out. They also changed and evolved significantly over time, particularly Goldust, who went from androgynous movie lover to family man to impressionist to god botherer to comic relief to someone affiliated with Tourette syndrome to, well, the character went through a lot. But it's a testament to Runnels that he was willing to take on not just that daring and divisive identity, but also, for better or worse, gimmicks like Seven and Black Reign. A man of many faces, but a singular talent, Dustin Runnels is certainly an example to others who are tasked with doing an outlandish gimmick, as well as someone who can impart 3 decades plus of knowledge to the next generation. My name's Tom Campbell from Cultaholic.com. Stay safe. Love you. Bye.